You really thought I wouldn't show up? The words didn't just hang in the air. They detonated. Conversations, once light and giddy with champagne, collapsed into silence. The laughter of old friends and coworkers curdled into shocked murmurs. Forks clinked back onto porcelain plates. Somewhere, a champagne flute tipped and spilled pale gold liquid across a crisp white tablecloth, but no one noticed. Every single guest at Frank Whitman's backyard baby shower had their gaze fixed on me. I stepped out of the sleek black limousine with deliberate grace, each movement choreographed for maximum effect. The sun caught the scarlet of my heels, their sharp clicks echoing across the flagstone driveway like the herald of war. The tailored fabric of my white and black jumpsuit hugged my frame like armor, each step radiating the confidence I had once been told I could never possess again. Pastel pink balloons trembled in the breeze, tethered helplessly to the arch that read, "Welcome, Baby Whitman." Rows of chairs faced the decorated patio where Frank had been standing just moments ago, basking in the glow of anticipation for his perfect life. Now, his jaw slackened, eyes wide, skin drained of color. The man I had once loved, once trusted, looked like a child caught with a hand in the cookie jar. Beside him, Claire, the new wife, the replacement, the so-called miracle vessel of the Whitman legacy, clutched his arm. Her manicured nails dug into his sleeve, her smile disintegrating as her wide, fearful eyes darted between me and the limousine. Her satin dress clung to her round belly, a public declaration of everything I had supposedly failed to provide. I let the silence grow, stretched taut, until it threatened to snap. And then it broke, not with words, but with the innocent laughter of children. 3 small bodies tumbled from the limousine behind me, their joy uncontained. Elijah sprinted toward the balloon arch, his tiny blazer flapping as he shouted, "Bubbles!" at the floating spheres above. Eden, my sweet girl, twirled in her pink dress, curls bouncing, delighted simply to spin on grass that wasn't her own backyard. Ezra crouched low, fascination written across his round face, as he gathered a fistful of confetti from the ground, holding it to the light as though it were treasure. The collective gasp of the guests was nearly physical, a wave of shock crashing over the manicured lawn. "Karma doesn't send warning letters," I said, my voice carrying without effort. "She arrives unannounced." And sometimes I glanced behind me at my children. She brings reinforcements. A nervous laugh rippled at the edge of the crowd, quickly silenced by Frank's glare. He stepped forward, his mouth opening as though to reclaim control of the narrative, but his throat seemed to betray him. No sound came out. His Adam's apple bobbed visibly as he swallowed. My lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "My name is Rose Keating now," I continued, adjusting the belt at my waist as if I were standing on a stage and not in the backyard of the man who had discarded me. "But for 8 years I was Rose Whitman, wife of Frank Whitman, the man who promised me forever, then handed me divorce papers because I couldn't give him children." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wildfire. I caught snippets. "That's his ex-wife. She has kids. Triplets? Oh my God." Frank's mother, seated near the front with a clutch of silver-haired friends, pressed a hand to her pearls. Her eyes narrowed into slits as they flicked between me and the toddlers darting across the grass. Claire's hand, still gripping Frank's arm, trembled. "Whose kids are those?" someone whispered. I bent, scooping Ezra into my arms as he proudly presented me with a handful of glittering confetti. I kissed the top of his head, then lifted my gaze to the woman who had replaced me. "They're mine," I said simply. "Meet Elijah, Eden, and Ezra Keating, my triplets." Dear viewers, this is a story of victory, resilience, hope, and justice. Make sure you stay till the end, because my story will challenge everything you know about marriage and childlessness. If you are new to this channel, click on subscribe, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's get into my story fully. The name landed with the weight of a gavel strike. Keating, not Whitman. A name that declared freedom, rebirth, a future no longer chained to Frank's lies. Frank staggered as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. His carefully constructed image, the triumphant husband who had shed a barren wife for fertile new love, fractured before his own family and friends. "You," he began, his voice raw, but the words crumbled. I tilted my head, watching him flounder, savoring the role reversal. For years, I had been the one fumbling, apologizing, scrambling to justify my worth under his scrutiny. Today, the spotlight was his, and it was merciless. "I never wanted to ruin your party," I said, though my tone betrayed the lie. But when an invitation arrives addressed to Rose Whitman, one assumes it must have been sent deliberately. "Perhaps you thought I'd come alone, a relic of your past to parade before your guests as the baronet's wife who couldn't measure up." Gasps. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, unwilling to meet Frank's eyes. Claire's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a subconscious shield. I lowered Ezra gently to the ground, brushing his curls with my fingertips before standing tall again. "But you see," I continued, "you built your story on a lie. You painted me as defective, unstable, obsessed. You told anyone who would listen that I had wasted your prime years. And all the while, I let my gaze bore into Frank's unflinching. The truth was that I was never broken." Frank flinched as though struck. The murmurs grew louder, swelling like a tide. Guests turned to each other with wide eyes, whispers threading through the crowd. I let the silence linger again, not because I lacked words, but because the silence itself was damning. In that quiet, every lie Frank had told, every sneer, every condescending dismissal hung heavy, undeniable. The children, my children, were proof enough. I stepped forward, each click of my heel deliberate, savoring the way Frank instinctively retreated. His perfect baby shower, his carefully cultivated new life, was unraveling not with shouting or chaos, but with presence, with undeniable truth. Revenge, I realized, doesn't need fireworks. It doesn't scream. It simply arrives whole, radiant, undeniable. And tonight, revenge wore red heels. If you looked at me that afternoon stepping out of the limousine, you'd think I'd been born fearless. But the truth? The woman who arrived in red heels was forged out of fire. Once upon a time, I was just Rose. Young, eager, naive enough to believe love alone could carry a marriage. I was 24 when I met Frank Whitman. It was 2014, A humid August evening in downtown Atlanta. The glass of the high-rise tower gleamed against the fading sunset, the lobby buzzing with men in sharp suits and women in pencil skirts, all carrying glossy business cards like weapons. I was the youngest event coordinator in my company, still new enough to wear thrift store blazers and pray no one noticed the scuff marks on my pumps. I remember standing near the refreshments table, a paper plate of shrimp cocktail trembling slightly in my hand as I tried to look like I belonged. I told myself over and over, "Don't spill, Rose. Whatever you do, don't spill." That's when I noticed him. Frank. He didn't enter the room, he arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy swagger that made people part without realizing they were moving. He had the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that came from being told all his life that the world would bend for him. And it often did. I caught his eye for just a second, and something happened. His stride faltered, then redirected toward me. Of all the polished executives in the room, his gaze landed on the nervous 24-year-old clinging to a paper plate. "Not eating," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. I laughed awkwardly, trying not to drop anything on myself. First impressions matter. His grin flashed, boyish but dangerous. "Smart. Though I'd say you're doing just fine." That was the beginning. Frank pursued me like a man with no doubts. Phone calls late into the night. Flowers delivered to my desk. Tickets to plays I'd never dreamed of affording. He had a way of making me feel chosen, as though he could have anyone in the world but, inexplicably, wanted me. Our dates blurred into a whirlwind: rooftop dinners, weekend trips, champagne under city lights. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, what kind of house I wanted someday. I told him about the wraparound porches I loved in Texas, how I wanted a family of my own. "A big one," I said, smiling into my glass of wine. "At least 3 kids." His eyes lit up. "Same. A big, noisy house full of kids. You'd make an incredible mother, Rose." At 24, those words were intoxicating. My friends teased me, saying he moved too fast, but I didn't care. When Frank looked at me, I felt like the missing piece in someone's perfect puzzle. 2 years later, under a canopy of white roses, we married. It was May of 2016, warm and bright, the air thick with the perfume of flowers. My family flew in from Houston. His filled the pews of the Atlanta chapel. I wore ivory silk, hair pinned in soft curls, my hands trembling as I held my bouquet. When the doors opened and I stepped into the aisle, Frank's eyes were already wet. He mouthed, "You're perfect." We said the words in sickness and in health, for better or worse, and I believed them. I truly did. That night, on the balcony of our honeymoon suite, Frank wrapped me in his arms and whispered, "You're my forever, Rose. Our future is going to be beautiful." And for a while it was. Our first year was golden. Lazy Sundays tangled in bed. Dinner parties with friends, where Frank bragged about my cooking. Vacations where he insisted on taking too many photos of me because "you're breathtaking and I need proof." 6 months in, the conversations about kids grew more serious. He'd linger outside baby stores, pointing out little shoes in the window. He'd nudge me when commercials for diapers came on, grinning like a child himself. One day, he'd say, "Soon." I was ready. More than ready. The idea of children with Frank filled me with hope. I pictured little hands gripping my fingers, bedtime stories, family portraits on Christmas cards. We started trying that winter. And for a while, it was fun, a secret shared between us, a project that made us giggle in whispered late-night conversations. Every negative test stung, but Frank would kiss my forehead and say, "Next month, babe. Next month." At least in the beginning. The first time his tone shifted, it was so subtle, I almost missed it. I was curled up on the couch, another negative test shoved to the bottom of the trash. Frank walked in, glanced at the test box, and sighed. "Are you sure you're tracking your cycle right, Rose?" he asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. I forced a smile. "Yes. I've been careful. Maybe we should try different vitamins? Or, I don't know, maybe exercise more could help." The words were light, but they landed heavy. For the first time, I felt the sting of implication. Maybe the problem was me. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible. But cracks spread. The cracks widened slowly, so slowly I almost convinced myself they weren't there. At first, Frank's comments were disguised as concern. "Are you eating enough protein, Rose? Maybe if you cut down on coffee it would help." But over time, the tone shifted from gentle suggestions to subtle criticisms. The subtext was clear. If we weren't conceiving, it had to be my fault. By the second year of trying, hope was turning sour. Our bedroom no longer felt like a place of intimacy. It became a laboratory. We had ovulation kits, fertility apps, thermometers, and calendars stuck to the fridge. Our lovemaking turned into scheduled tasks, stripped of spontaneity, weighed down with expectation. Frank grew impatient. The man who once pulled me close and whispered about forever now checked his phone after each failed attempt, sighing heavily. He would roll onto his back, mutter, "Maybe next time," and fall asleep while I lay awake staring at the ceiling, swallowing my tears so he wouldn't hear. Frank's mother was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. We were at Sunday dinner in her grand colonial-style home, her silverware glinting beneath the chandelier. Halfway through the meal, she fixed me with a smile too sharp to be kind. "Still no baby, Rose?" she asked, her tones syrupy sweet. The table fell quiet. My fork froze midair. Frank didn't say a word. He just kept cutting his steak as though her question hadn't been a knife plunged into my chest. I laughed weakly. "Not yet. We're trying." Her smile tightened. "Well, don't wait too long. You know how biology works. A woman's clock doesn't tick forever." Heat crept up my neck. I waited for Frank to defend me, to reassure his mother, to remind her that our private life wasn't dinner table fodder. But he said nothing. He only chewed, swallowed, and moved on to the next bite. That silence screamed louder than any words could have. By year 3, we were regulars at the fertility clinic. I endured blood tests, ultrasounds, invasive procedures that left me bruised inside and out. Each time, the doctors repeated the same thing. My results were normal. I clung to those words like a lifeline. But Frank refused to accept them. "There has to be something they're missing," he insisted. "There's no way it could be me." I suggested he get tested just once to rule out all possibilities. He laughed. "Rose, I played football in college. I'm in perfect health. Trust me, I'm not the problem." His confidence was unshakable, impermeable. And I, desperate to keep the peace, dropped the subject. Meanwhile, I began fertility medications that wreaked havoc on my body. Mood swings left me sobbing on the bathroom floor. The injections burned my skin. My hair thinned. My once bright spirit dimmed. Frank's sympathy evaporated with each passing month. "You're too emotional," he snapped once when I cried after a failed cycle. "Maybe stress is why you can't get pregnant." Those words carved into me like a blade. The distance between us grew, subtle at first, then undeniable. Frank started working later. He claimed he was networking, building his career, but I knew better. He didn't want to come home to a house steeped in tension and unspoken grief. When we did spend time together, it was strained. We spoke less, laughed less. I tried to revive our old spark with date nights and surprise dinners, but Frank brushed them off. "Not tonight, Rose. I'm tired." I began to feel like a ghost in my own marriage. It was a Tuesday evening when the first true blow landed. We had just returned from another doctor's appointment, another round of inconclusive results. I set my bag down on the counter, exhaustion pressing heavy on my shoulders. Frank leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Maybe I married the wrong woman," he said flatly. My knees went weak. My hands trembled. I searched his face for some sign that he was joking, exaggerating, speaking in anger. But there was none. Only the icy truth of his conviction. I whispered, "How can you say that?" "Because I want kids, Rose. I need kids. And clearly, you can't give me that." Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, as though absorbing a fatal diagnosis. That night, I curled up on my side of the bed, facing the wall, while Frank snored soundly beside me. The divide between us was no longer metaphorical. It was physical, palpable. A chasm. By the 5th year of our marriage, contempt had replaced love. Frank no longer hid his disappointment. He cracked jokes about my biological clock in front of friends. He discussed our struggles with coworkers, painting himself as the noble husband burdened with a defective wife. The man who once kissed my forehead when I cried now rolled his eyes. The final straw came in the form of a thick envelope. Divorce papers. "I can't do this anymore," Frank said when I confronted him. "I need a family, Rose. You can't give me that. This marriage is over." My vision swam. The world tilted. 8 years of love, of sacrifice, of trying, discarded in a single sentence. And just like that, I became what society whispers about but never says aloud: childless. Betrayal doesn't always arrive in a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, disguised as whispers, paperwork, and half-truths until one day, you realize the life you thought you were living has already ended. For me, it came in pieces. Shards of truth, so sharp they cut before I even knew I was bleeding. The official story Frank told everyone was neat, digestible, sympathetic for him. Irreconcilable differences. That's what the paper said. Clean, clinical, no mess. But the words he whispered into the ears of friends, family, and colleagues told a much harsher tale. She's obsessed with getting pregnant. She's unstable. I wasted my prime years on a barren woman. Those phrases drifted back to me like smoke from a fire I hadn't started. At first, I refused to believe he'd say such things. This was the man who had once looked at me like I was his everything. But denial doesn't extinguish smoke. Eventually, the flames always show. By the time our divorce was finalized, the narrative had already calcified in the minds of those around us. Poor Frank, the dutiful husband saddled with a defective wife. Poor Frank, the victim of biology's cruelty. Poor Frank, forced to let go of a marriage doomed by my broken body. And me? I was left with the label I had feared most. Barren. The truth didn't come from Frank's mouth. It never would have. It came in the form of an envelope. I was sitting at the kitchen counter of my sister's apartment in Houston when I opened it. Just another piece of mail forwarded from the old house, I thought. Bills, statements, scraps of a life I no longer owned. But inside was an insurance claim from a fertility clinic. Not for me. For him. I scanned the lines once, then twice. My heart pounded louder with every word. Frank had undergone fertility testing. Months before our final round of treatments. Months before he called me defective. And the results? Low motility, weak sperm count, near impossible odds of natural conception. The paper shook in my hands. My breath came ragged, like I'd been sprinting though I hadn't moved. I reread the numbers, the medical jargon, the doctor's notes. All of it pointed to the same truth. It was never me. The years of needles, hormones, invasive procedures, unnecessary. The nights I lay on cold bathroom tiles sobbing. Pointless. The identity I'd let collapse. False. Frank had known. He had sat across from me in sterile waiting rooms, watched me blame myself, listened to me call myself broken, and he had let me. Worse, he had encouraged it. He hadn't just lied. He had stolen years of my life with that lie. The final blow came quickly after. Frank's new woman wasn't a stranger. I'd met Claire once, fleetingly, at one of his office parties. She was blonde, crisp, with sharp laughter that grated on me even before I knew why. When rumors reached me that she was pregnant, my first instinct was disbelief. After all, the insurance statement had made it clear. Frank's chances of fathering a child naturally were almost non-existent. But disbelief doesn't hold against ultrasound photos posted on Facebook. There she was, beaming, Frank's hand splayed across her stomach. Caption: Baby Whitman coming soon. Our little miracle. Miracle. That word twisted in my gut. Because if Claire was pregnant, it meant one of two things. Either the tests were wrong, or they had pursued treatments together after he'd denied me the chance to try again. Either way, the conclusion was brutal. Frank hadn't left marriage because he didn't want kids. He left because he didn't want them with me. News travels fast in social circles where people thrive on drama. At church, I noticed whispers behind hymnals. At the grocery store, an old acquaintance cornered me with pity painted across her face. I heard Frank's new wife is expecting, she said softly, as though speaking too loudly might shatter me. I guess it just wasn't meant to be for you too. I forced a smile and nodded, then drove home and screamed into my steering wheel until my throat was raw. Wasn't meant to be. The phrase echoed in my head, as though my pain was destiny, as though my suffering had some cosmic justification. No. It wasn't meant to be, because Frank chose betrayal over truth. By the time I turned 30, I was hollow. I'd lost my husband, my home, and the future I had built in my mind. Worse, I'd lost myself. Every introduction felt like an apology. This is Rose. She's divorced. No children. The words tasted bitter every time. I couldn't say them without feeling the weight of judgment, even if it was only in my imagination. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment of my marriage like a cruel highlight reel. His sighs of disappointment. His mother's cutting remarks. The day he dropped the divorce papers on the table with the same detachment one might place junk mail. I'd whisper to myself, "What's wrong with me?" Even though the insurance statement sat in my drawer, clear evidence that the problem had never been mine. But trauma doesn't obey logic. Lies, repeated often enough, burrow deep until they feel like truth. I was stuck in that pit, broken, humiliated, discarded. And Frank, he was thriving, posting photos of Claire's baby bump, smiling at barbecues, beaming at his colleagues' congratulations. The man who had destroyed me was being celebrated while I, the innocent one, was shamed. It was my sister who dragged me to therapy. "You can't keep living like this, Rose," she said one morning as I sat on her couch, still in pajamas at 11 a.m., scrolling through Claire's social media with tears streaking my cheeks. She drove me to the appointment herself, sat in the waiting room while I fumbled through my first session. At first, I resisted. I was convinced therapy couldn't undo what had been done. But week by week, something shifted. My therapist listened without judgment. She gave names to the things I'd endured: gaslighting, emotional abuse, reproductive coercion. She helped me see that Frank hadn't just left me. He had rewritten the story of who I was, convincing me I was worthless, so he wouldn't have to face his own failings. "Rose," she said one session, leaning forward, "what if the story you've been told about yourself isn't true?" Those words cracked something open inside me. What if I wasn't barren? What if I wasn't defective? What if the shame wasn't mine to carry? On her advice, I scheduled another round of tests, this time, for me alone, free of Frank's influence. The results came back clear. Perfect. Fertile. My body had never been broken. It had been sabotaged by a man too proud to admit his own failings, too cruel to let me live free of blame. When I read the results, I cried, not out of sorrow, but relief. Years of pain, wasted. Yes, but I was free now. I wasn't barren. I wasn't defective. I wasn't what Frank had branded me. For the first time in years, I felt the faint flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. People like to talk about rock bottom as though it's a single moment, a dramatic fall, a crash, and then the inevitable climb back up. But what no one tells you is that rock bottom is not one place. It's a labyrinth, a twisting maze of days where the air feels too heavy, where survival is reduced to the next breath, the next step, the next hour. For me, rock bottom came not in a single night, but in a season, a long, brutal winter of the soul. After the truth about Frank and Claire came out, my life became unrecognizable. Gone was the woman who once believed in fairy tales. Gone was the wife who planned nurseries and memorized ovulation charts. What remained was a shell. Mornings blurred into afternoons. I'd wake up in my sister's guest room, sunlight sneaking through the blinds, my body heavy with the kind of exhaustion sleep couldn't cure. My sister, Angela, would knock softly on the door before work. Rose, do you want me to make you breakfast? Most days I didn't answer. Some days I managed a week. No thanks. And then I'd curl back under the covers, clutching the pillow as if it could fill the void Frank had left. I stopped checking my phone because each scroll was torture. Frank and Claire posting ultrasound photos. Their baby shower invitations circulating. Friends I thought were mine commenting, "So happy for you guys." Happy for him.
For them.
Never for me. Even grocery store trips became landmines. A baby giggling in a cart, a pregnant woman rubbing her belly in the checkout line, a father hoisting his child onto his shoulders. Each sight was a blade, reminding me of what I'd been denied. One morning, I dragged myself into the bathroom and caught my reflection. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman staring back at me had dark circles beneath her eyes, hair matted in a way that spoke of too many days unwashed. Her skin was dull, lips cracked, shoulders slumped. She looked older than 30. I touched the glass as though I could reach through it and shake her awake. "What happened to you?" I whispered. The reflection didn't answer. If the days were hollow, the nights were worse. Silence has a way of magnifying pain. In the quiet, memories return uninvited. The sound of Frank's laughter in the early years, the way he used to hold me, the promises of children we'd whispered in the dark. Then, inevitably, the memory would shift. His sighs of disappointment, his biting remarks, the moment he told me maybe he'd married the wrong woman. I'd clutch my pillow until my arms ached, sometimes screaming into it just to release the pressure inside my chest. Other times I'd cry so silently it felt like suffocating. One night, I found myself kneeling on the floor, hands pressed together though I hadn't prayed in years. "God, why me?" I whispered. "Why did you let this happen? Why wasn't I enough?" The silence that followed was deafening. Angela refused to let me drown. She scheduled therapy appointments, drove me when I refused, sat in the waiting room like a soldier standing guard. At first, I resented her. I didn't want to talk. Talking meant reliving. But therapy forced me to put words to the things Frank had done. Gaslighting, emotional abuse, reproductive coercion. Hearing those terms was like being handed a map. Suddenly, the maze of my suffering had names, pathways, explanations. One session, my therapist asked, "Rose, what do you believe about yourself right now?" I hesitated. That I'm broken. "And what evidence do you have of that?" The insurance statement flashed in my mind. The clean test results. The truth that my body had never been the problem. Slowly, painfully, I admitted, none. No evidence. Her smile was soft, patient. "Then maybe it's time to rewrite the story." Recovery wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was small, fragile victories. Showering 2 days in a row. Cooking myself breakfast instead of skipping meals. Stepping outside to feel the sun on my face. Each act felt monumental, like stacking bricks on the foundation of a house I'd thought reduced to ash. I began journaling, at my therapist's suggestion. At first, the pages were filled with rage, curses aimed at Frank, grief over wasted years, bitterness toward Claire. But slowly, hope crept in between the lines. What if I wasn't defined by what had been taken from me? What if I could build something new? It was a Tuesday when I met him. I'd finally agreed to accompany Angela to a local charity gala. She insisted I needed to get out, to remember life existed beyond my pain. I resisted, but she won. The ballroom was glittering, full of laughter and clinking glasses. I wore a dress Angela had picked, black with a plunging neckline that made me feel like maybe I still had pieces of myself worth showing. I was standing by the buffet table, nervously picking at a plate of hors d'oeuvres, when a voice spoke beside me. "Those crab cakes are overrated." I turned and found myself looking into the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that was calm rather than overbearing. His smile wasn't practiced like Frank's had been. It was easy, genuine. I laughed softly. "Good to know. I was just pretending I liked it." "Daniel Keating," he said, extending a hand. "Rose," I replied, shaking it. Something about the way he looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, unsettled and comforted me all at once. We talked for nearly an hour. About the event, about Houston, about nothing and everything. He told me he was a widower, that he ran a small but growing tech company. I told him pieces of my story, carefully edited, but enough to hint at the scars beneath the surface. He didn't flinch. He didn't pity me. He just listened, nodding, as though my pain didn't make me less, but more. At the end of the night, he said, "I'd like to see you again, Rose. No pressure, just dinner." Something in me wanted to say no, to run, to protect myself. But another part, the part therapy had slowly been coaxing awake, whispered yes. "Yes," I said, surprising myself. Driving home that night, I caught my reflection in the car window. For the first time in years, I didn't see only grief staring back. I saw possibility. It terrified me. It thrilled me. Because maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't over. Hope is a fragile thing. When it first returns after years of absence, it trembles in your hands, as if it might shatter at the slightest misstep. With Daniel, hope didn't just return, it bloomed. Our first dinner was simple. A quiet restaurant tucked into a corner of Houston, warm lighting, a jazz trio in the background. I remember being nervous. My hands shook as I held the menu, worried I would say the wrong thing or laugh too loudly. But Daniel had a way of dissolving nerves. He asked questions and actually listened. When I spoke, he leaned in, not to analyze or to correct, but to understand. Halfway through the meal, he said something that made me pause. "You know, Rose, you don't have to prove anything to me. You're already enough just sitting here." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through a storm. With Frank, I had always been proving my worth, my fertility, my ability to hold his crumbling dream together. With Daniel, I simply was. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship grew. We went on walks in the park, sat in cozy coffee shops, explored farmers' markets on Saturday mornings. He was patient, gentle, never pushing, never demanding. When I pulled back, afraid of repeating past mistakes, he gave me space. When I stumbled over old insecurities, he steadied me without judgment. One night, I confessed through tears, "I can't have children." He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Rose, I'm not with you for what you can or can't give me. I'm with you because of who you are." I believed him. Slowly but surely, I believed him. The first time he kissed me, I cried. not because of the kiss itself, but because of the tenderness behind it. Frank's kisses had become transactions, obligations tied to calendars and fertility charts. Daniel's kiss was free, unburdened, filled with nothing but affection. In that moment, I realized how starved I'd been for gentleness, how long I had lived on scraps of conditional love. With Daniel, love wasn't earned. It was given. It was autumn when he proposed. We were walking through a park lined with orange and gold leaves. He stopped beneath an oak tree, pulled a small velvet box from his coat, and dropped to one knee. "Rose Keating," he said, his eyes steady on mine, "you've been through fire and still shine brighter than anyone I know. I don't want to fix you, because you were never broken. I just want to stand beside you. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Yes." The ring slipped onto my finger, simple but perfect, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past loosen its grip. Our wedding was small, intimate, nothing like the grand affair I'd once had with Frank. It was better. Angela stood by my side as maid of honor. Daniel's brother held the rings. Friends who had stayed through the storm filled the seats. When I walked down the aisle this time, there were no doubts, no cracks beneath the surface. Just certainty. We said our vows, and when Daniel promised for better or worse, I believed him, truly believed him. 2 months later, I missed my period. At first, I dismissed it. Stress, maybe. But when the second month came and went, I bought a test. The 2 pink lines appeared almost instantly. I sank onto the bathroom floor, the test shaking in my hands. After years of heartbreak, years of negative results, I didn't know how to process the sight. When I told Daniel, his face broke into a smile, so wide it seemed to light the room. He pulled me into his arms, whispering, "We're having a baby, Rose." A baby. We held each other, laughing and crying all at once. The first ultrasound was supposed to be routine. We sat in the dim room, my hand clenched in Daniel's, my heart pounding. The doctor moved the wand across my belly, her brows furrowing slightly. I panicked. "Is something wrong?" She smiled. "Not wrong. Just unexpected. Do you see this?" She pointed to the screen. 1 heartbeat. 2 and 3. 3. I repeated, my voice trembling. "Triplets," she confirmed. I stared at the screen, tears spilling down my cheeks. Daniel let out a shocked laugh, burying his face in his hands before kissing me over and over. "Triplets, Rose," he said, his voice breaking with joy. "You really don't do anything small, do you?" For the first time in my life, the word miracle didn't sting. It belonged to me. Pregnancy was not easy. Carrying 3 lives at once took everything out of me. Morning sickness that lasted all day, swollen ankles, sleepless nights. But every discomfort was a gift. Every kick, every flutter reminded me that I was not broken. Daniel was unwavering. He attended every appointment, held my hair when I was sick, rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. He painted the nursery himself, soft yellows and greens, refusing to let me lift a brush. "You've done enough," he said, kissing my forehead. "You're growing 3 human beings. That's superhero work." I had never felt so cherished. At 32, I gave birth to Elijah, Eden, and Ezra Keating. The delivery was long, exhausting, But when I heard their cries, something inside me healed. I held them, three tiny miracles wrapped in blankets, and sobbed uncontrollably. I thought I'd never have this, I whispered. Daniel kissed my temple, his voice thick with emotion. And now you have everything. In that moment, the years of pain, the labels, the humiliation, they didn't vanish, but they lost their power. Because here in my arms was the proof that Frank had lied, that I had survived, that I was more than enough. Motherhood was chaos, sleepless nights, bottles, diapers, cries that seemed endless. But it was joy, pure, overwhelming joy. Watching Elijah's first smile, hearing Eden's first laugh, seeing Ezra take his first wobbly steps, each moment was a victory. I wasn't barren. I wasn't defective. I was a mother. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Peace has a way of making you forget the chaos that once ruled your life. After years of walking through fire, I had finally found calm. The house Daniel and I bought together was modest but warm, its walls echoing with laughter and the clatter of toys. Mornings began with the cries of Elijah, Eden, and Ezra tumbling into our bed, their tiny limbs kicking as they demanded pancakes or cartoons. Evenings ended with storybooks and lullabies, Daniel's deep voice humming as I rocked one baby while he rocked another. Motherhood was exhausting, yes, but it was the kind of exhaustion that filled rather than emptied. I had everything I once believed lost forever: love, stability, and children of my own. It was in that peace that the letter arrived. It came on a Thursday. I was sorting through the mail, bills, coupons, the usual clutter, when I saw it. Heavy cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. My name scrawled across the front. But not my name. Mrs. Rose Whitman. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, as if someone had reached into the past and dragged me backward. I tore it open, my fingers trembling. Inside, on cream-colored paper, were the words that made my stomach twist. You are cordially invited to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Whitman. Join Frank and Claire as they welcome their little miracle. The date, the time, the address. A baby shower. For Frank, for Claire, and I, his discarded, childless ex-wife in his narrative, was invited. I sank into a chair, the invitation slipping from my hands. Why? Why would he invite me? It wasn't reconciliation. Frank had never been a man of peace. No, this was deliberate, calculated. He wanted me there as a prop, a ghost from his past. The barren ex-wife paraded before his friends and family as proof of his triumph. In his mind, I was still childless, still broken, still the woman he'd painted in whispers to anyone who would listen. Anger surged hot in my chest. My hands shook. I could almost hear his smug voice, see the smirk he wore when he thought he had won. But then I looked up. Across the room, Elijah was stacking blocks into a wobbly tower. Eden was scribbling in a coloring book. Ezra was asleep on the couch, his thumb in his mouth. And I laughed. A sharp, incredulous laugh. Because Frank had no idea. That evening, I showed Daniel the invitation. He read it once, his brow furrowing, then looked at me. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I'm thinking he wants to humiliate me," I said, my voice tight. "He wants me to walk into that party alone, childless, and watch him gloat." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and knowing. But you wouldn't be walking in alone, Rose. My breath caught. He was right. I wasn't the woman Frank had left behind. I was a wife, a mother, whole in ways Frank could never imagine. What if we just ignored it? I whispered, doubt creeping in. What if we stayed here, in our peace, and let him rot in his lies? Daniel reached for my hand. Sometimes peace isn't about staying silent. Sometimes it's about speaking truth in the face of lies. You don't have to go for revenge, Rose. You go for closure. For yourself. And for them. He nodded toward our children. I swallowed hard. Closure. Truth. For years, Frank had written my story for me. Maybe it was time to take the pen back. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories replayed like ghosts, Frank's contempt, his accusations, his betrayal. For so long, I had carried his version of me, broken, barren, unworthy. But tomorrow, I could shatter that lie in front of everyone who believed it. The decision came not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet certainty. I would go, not to gloat, not even to seek revenge, but to stand in my truth. I would show Frank and everyone else that the story he told had never been mine. The days leading up to the shower were almost electric with anticipation. First, the outfit. I chose a tailored black and white jumpsuit, sleek and powerful, the fabric hugging my figure in a way that declared confidence. Red heels, bold, defiant, impossible to ignore. My hair in soft curls, my makeup sharp but elegant. I wasn't going to shrink. I was going to shine. Next, the children. Elijah, Eden, and Ezra would wear matching outfits, navy blazers for the boys, a pink dress with a bow for Eden. Their shoes polished, their curls tamed just enough to look neat without losing their wild charm. Finally, the arrival. Daniel surprised me with the idea. A limousine, he said with a grin. If you're going to crash the narrative, do it in style. I laughed, but the more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. The limousine wasn't about vanity. It was about symbolism. About walking into the lion's den not in shame, but in triumph. The morning of the shower, I woke before dawn. My stomach churned with nerves, but beneath the nerves was steel. I dressed slowly, savoring each step. The jumpsuit sliding over my skin, the heels clicking against the floor, the lipstick painting my lips red like armor. When I emerged from the bedroom, Daniel whistled low. He won't know what hit him. The triplets clapped, sensing the excitement, even if they didn't understand it. "Mama pretty," Eden squealed, tugging at my hand. We gathered our things, bundled the children into the limousine, and set off. As the city passed by outside the tinted windows, I closed my eyes and breathed. Today was not about Frank. Today was about me. About reclaiming every piece of myself he had tried to destroy. When the limousine pulled into the driveway, conversations in the backyard stilled. Champagne glasses froze midair. Every eye turned toward the sleek black car as the door opened. I stepped out first, red heels striking the stone like a drumbeat. Behind me, Elijah, Eden, and Ezra tumbled out, laughing, their innocence disarming the silence that had fallen. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread like fire. And then I spoke. "You really thought I wouldn't show up?" Silence. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped out of the limousine. the click of my red heels echoing against stone like the tolling of a bell. Conversations that had been bubbling seconds before died in midair. Champagne flutes froze halfway to mouths. And then came the gasps. 3 small bodies tumbled from the limousine behind me, their laughter slicing through the stunned quiet. Elijah ran toward the nearest patch of grass, giggling as he chased after a butterfly. Eden smoothed her little dress and spun in a circle, curls bouncing. Ezra clung to my leg before darting off to investigate the swing set. The scene was surreal. My 3 miracles filling Frank's manicured backyard with life, while his guests sat frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide. "You really thought I wouldn't show up?" I said, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. The whispers started immediately. "Are those her kids?" But I thought she couldn't. Triplets? Oh my God. Heads turned. Fingers pointed. Faces shifted from curiosity to judgment to shock again. I felt the power of it wash over me. Not arrogance, but vindication. For years, I had been whispered about, pitted, blamed. Now those whispers turned on Frank. I will never forget Frank's face in that moment. The man who had once called me defective, who had paraded his new wife as proof of his triumph, stood pale and rigid, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the patio stones. His mouth opened as if to speak, then snapped shut. His eyes darted from me to the children and back, disbelief etched deep into his features. Beside him, Claire clutched his arm, her smile collapsing into confusion and fear. Her hand instinctively went to her pregnant belly, as though to shield herself from something unseen. "Whose kids are those?" someone whispered too loudly from the crowd. I smiled, bending down as Ezra tugged on my hand. "They're mine," I said clearly, my voice steady, unshaken. "Meet Elijah, Eden, and Ezra Keating, my triplets." Gasps rippled again. The name, Keating, hung in the air like a verdict. Frank finally found his voice. "Rose," he stepped forward, face contorted in something between anger and panic. "What are you doing here?" I tilted my head, meeting his gaze with calm. "Why, Frank, I was invited." I held up the cream-colored invitation. "Did you think I wouldn't come?" A nervous chuckle ran through the crowd. Frank's composure faltered. His hands twitched at his sides. "This is inappropriate," he stammered. "This is my family celebration, not." "Not what?" I cut in. "Not a place for the wife you discarded because you said she couldn't give you children?" Murmurs spread, sharp and quick. Claire's face tightened. I took a step closer, my heels clicking like a gavel against the stone. "For years, you told everyone I was broken, that I was barren, that I was obsessed, unstable, unworthy of you. You let me inject myself with hormones, endure humiliating procedures, sob on bathroom floors, all while you knew the truth." Frank's jaw clenched. "Stop." "No," I said firmly. "Not today. The truth has lived in the dark long enough." I turned to the crowd, my voice carrying. "What Frank didn't tell you is that he had himself tested. Low motility, weak count, near impossible odds of natural conception. The problem was never me." The silence deepened, heavier than before. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between us. Frank's mother pressed a hand to her mouth. "Lies," Frank snapped, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I gestured toward my children, who were now playing on the swing set, blissfully unaware. Does that look like a lie? Claire's face went pale. She looked from me to the triplets, her hand tightening on Frank's arm. Is it true? She whispered, her voice trembling. Frank pulled at his collar, sweat beading on his forehead. Claire, don't listen to her. She's bitter. She's here to ruin this day. But the damage was done. Doubt flickered in Claire's eyes, her smile gone, her body stiff. Guests who had once laughed at Frank's jokes now looked at him with something sharper. Judgment. Disbelief. A man near the back muttered, "All this time?" A woman whispered, "And he blamed her?" The tide had turned. The whispers that once crushed me now crushed him. I stepped back, gathering my children to me. I didn't come here for revenge, I said softly, though my voice carried. I came because for too long my story was written by someone else. Today you've all seen the truth. I was never broken. I was never barren. I was simply with the wrong man. Daniel appeared then, walking from the limousine, calm and steady. He took my hand, kissed my temple, then bent to lift Ezra into his arms. The sight of us together, a real family, whole and strong, was the final blow. I looked back at Frank one last time. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation, his empire of lies crumbling around him. Karma doesn't send warning letters, I said. She arrives unannounced. And sometimes she brings reinforcements. With that, we turned and walked away, leaving gasps, whispers, and a shattered man in our wake. The silence that followed us out of Frank's backyard clung to me like smoke. Even as the limousine doors closed and the engine purred to life, I could still feel the weight of their stares, the gasps, the whispers that had shifted like a tide. For years, those whispers had been about me, the barren wife, the failure, the broken one. Tonight, they belonged to Frank. Inside the limousine, the children chattered happily, oblivious to the storm we had left behind. Elijah held up a balloon he had snatched from the yard. Eden hummed a tune she'd made up on the spot. Ezra curled against Daniel's chest, sucking his thumb. Daniel looked at me, his eyes warm. "You did it," he said softly. I exhaled, leaning my head against the seat. I didn't go there for revenge. But God, it felt good to tell the truth. "You didn't just tell it," he replied. "You showed it. No one can argue with what they saw." I thought of Frank's face, the way his smug confidence cracked like glass, the way Claire's hand trembled against her belly. For years, he had controlled the narrative. Tonight, I had taken it back. Later, I would hear the details trickle back through mutual acquaintances. How Claire had pulled Frank aside, her voice rising in disbelief. "You told me she was barren. You said she couldn't. Claire, she's lying. She's trying to ruin us." Lying? Those are 3 children, Frank. 3. Do you expect me to believe she made them up out of spite? Guests had overheard, of course. At parties like these, walls had ears. By the end of the night, Frank's carefully built facade was rubble. His mother, the one who had once whispered, "Still no baby, Rose," at every dinner, had reportedly stormed out of the party, her face tight with embarrassment. His father, stone-faced, refused to defend him. Siblings, cousins, colleagues, all left with questions he could no longer answer. The golden boy of the Whitman family, undone by the truth he had buried. At home, once the children were tucked into bed, I sat on the couch in silence. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only exhaustion. And something else. Not triumph. Not even satisfaction. Just peace. I turned to Daniel. You know what the strangest part is? What? I don't hate him anymore. Daniel raised an eyebrow. After everything he put you through? I nodded slowly. Hate kept me tethered to him. Tonight, I cut the rope. He is to live with himself now. That's punishment enough. Daniel pulled me close, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. That's strength, Rose. Real strength. Within days, the story spread. Houston society loved nothing more than gossip, and Frank's humiliation was prime material. The once envied couple, Frank and Claire, now carried a stain that no amount of champagne or curated Instagram posts could wash away. Claire stopped posting photos altogether. Mutual friends reported that she moved back in with her sister temporarily. As for Frank, his name became a punchline. Colleagues at his firm whispered behind his back. The man who had prided himself on control now found his own reputation uncontrollable. A week later, a letter arrived at our doorstep. Not embossed, not elegant, just a plain envelope with my name scrawled across it. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single page, Frank's handwriting jagged. You had no right. You embarrassed me. You ruined everything. I read it twice, then set it down, a strange calm settling over me. No, Frank, I murmured to myself. You ruined yourself. I didn't respond. Some letters don't deserve answers. That night, Elijah asked an innocent question. Mama, who was the man at the party? The one who looked mad. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. He was someone from my past, sweetheart. Someone who didn't treat me kindly. Is he bad? Eden piped up. I shook my head. Not bad. Just lost. Sometimes people hurt others because they're lost inside themselves. But that doesn't mean we let them decide who we are. Ezra, half asleep, mumbled, We got balloons. I smiled, kissing the top of his head. Yes, baby, we got balloons. And that's what matters. In the weeks that followed, life settled again. The shock of the showdown faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of family life. Diapers, bottles, bedtime stories, the real stuff, the important stuff. Every now and then, I would catch sight of the invitation tucked into my dresser drawer. A reminder of the day I walked into a lion's den and walked out whole. I no longer needed to prove myself. I had already done it, not just to Frank, but to myself. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he asked, Do you regret going? I thought about it, about the gasps, the whispers, the shattered glass on Frank's patio. No, I said finally. I don't regret it, because I wasn't showing off. I was showing the truth. And truth is its own kind of freedom. Daniel squeezed my hand. Then it's done. The past is finished. I leaned into him, my eyes closing as the triplets laughed in the yard. For the first time in a decade, the past didn't feel heavy. It felt like a story I had already read, one I didn't need to revisit again.